President Trump, as I mentioned, is imposing higher tariffs on almost all trading partners in what he's calling the beginning of a new system of trade. The president issued an executive order laying out tariffs against nearly 70 countries, some as high as 41%. But those tariffs are set to take effect in 7 days, not today as anticipated. And this morning, the president's also announcing he's raising the tariff rate on imports from Canada from 25% to 35%. Chief economist at Numerator, Leo Feller, has more on all of that. So, Leo, the White House has said that the rates were determined largely based on the trade deficit between the U.S. and those trading partners. What do you make of that approach? And do you see any anomalies sticking out to you here?
Yes, absolutely. So, listen, it does not look like the tariffs were actually set based on trade deficits. And I'll give you a very easy example here. Brazil, the U.S. actually runs a trade surplus with Brazil. We sell more to Brazil than we import from Brazil. And President Trump has actually said the reason that we're imposing 50% tariffs on Brazil on things like coffee that we import from Brazil is because of their treatment of Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, nothing really to do with an economic situation. The Canada 35% tariffs, President Trump mentioned yesterday that that's because of tariffs' position on recognizing Palestine. And so a lot of these tariffs that are being imposed really have nothing to do with economic circumstances. They seem more politically driven, and that's actually not allowed under the Constitution, right? It should be the case that Congress sets tariffs. And the president only has power over emergency tariffs for economic reasons. This doesn't look to be the case right now.
We also got this worse than expected jobs report today. Why do you think not only are this month's numbers so low and worse than expected, but also these downward revisions for the previous months?
You're right. So we got revisions, substantial revisions to the 2 prior months that suggest that jobs only grew about 14,000 in June, about 19,000 in May. This month we got 73,000. This is much lower than the roughly 130 to 150,000 jobs that we've been adding every single month during the past year. This signals that the economy is really treading water, that a lot of companies are being hesitant, are being nervous about expanding given the current economic environment. They are hiring a lot less. But interestingly, the unemployment rate is only at 4.2% right now, which is historically very low. And I think that has to do with changes in immigration policy that have been limiting the supply of workers joining the labor force or being able to join the labor force.
I bring in our business reporter, Alexis Christoforous, as well, because, Alexis, we're seeing the Dow now down 500 points. What do you make of how markets are reacting? And is this more tariffs? Is this more business report or a combination?
I think it's the whole kit and caboodle. I mean, investors are worried about a number of different things. You know, now these new tariff rates, these reciprocal tariffs, much higher than first thought, could go into effect next week. What will the real impact be on prices going forward? Still a big unknown, which I think is why you're seeing so many companies hesitant to bring on new employees when they don't truly understand what their costs are going to be. I must say I'm a little surprised that we're down this much, and I wouldn't be surprised if we turn around later in the day, because while this jobs report is disappointing, it makes it more likely that we get an interest rate cut from the Fed, possibly at their September and or October meetings. And we know that an interest rate cut would probably be something Wall Street, and we know President Trump, would like to see.
Leo, President Trump also posted on social media today that, and I'm quoting here, tariffs are bringing billions of dollars into the USA. What's your reaction to that? And is this, as the president has said, a period of maybe short-term pain for long-term gain?
So it's incorrect that tariffs are bringing billions of dollars into the U.S. because when we actually look at the data, it's American companies that are actually shouldering these tariffs right now, right? So instead of this money, let's take what we heard from earnings from Apple, from Procter and Gamble, from Ford. They've basically been saying, look, we are shouldering the cost of these higher tariffs. And if you think about the choices that companies have, can they go ahead and expand production? Can they buy new equipment? Can they hire more workers? Or do they pay more in tariffs? Right now, it looks like they are paying more in tariffs. And we've actually heard from some of these major players like Procter and Gamble in the consumer space saying, we are going to pass these on to consumers over the course of these next 6 months because we cannot shoulder these tariffs. This really means that it's not billions of dollars flowing in, it's just billions of dollars being reallocated within the US economy, ultimately away from consumer spending power and towards tariffs, which are really a tax on consumers.
And Leo, Apple says tariffs could cost them over $1 billion. Tesla says tariffs have increased their cost by $300 million. You mentioned other companies like Procter & Gamble, Hershey's, GM. They've all talked about this. So what does that mean for consumers in the U.S. and what areas, what products do you think will be affected most?
So for consumers in the US, we are starting to see at the very beginning of prices increasing for the end consumer. The reason this takes time to happen is that suppliers have contracts with manufacturers. Manufacturers have contracts with retailers. They can't simply go ahead and just increase prices suddenly because they are locked into existing contracts. But as these contracts start rolling over, they'll be able to start increasing prices. The Yale Budget Lab actually calculated that consumers are going to pay anywhere from around $2,000 more per year, $2,000 more per year, to around $4,000 more per year for all the items that they are buying. And this means that consumers have to make trade-offs, right? If it's more expensive for them to be able to buy Christmas presents, toys for their kids, things like Bluetooth speakers. These are all the areas that we're seeing higher prices, mostly because these are goods that have been coming in from China that has been tariffed more highly. But really, we're going to see price increases across the gamut because we're imposing tariffs as a country on electronics, on consumer products, but also things like coffee from Brazil, tomatoes from Mexico. This is really going to make the entire consumer basket a lot more expensive, not just a few goods here and there. It's just that this is going to take really 6 months to a year for consumers to start seeing this showing up in their daily purchases.
And we're seeing the Dow again still down a little over 500 now. Alexis, when you look at the jobs report, any specific sectors stick out to you?
Yes, and again, I feel like a broken record because we talk about the same sectors, it seems, every month. But once again, healthcare added the most jobs last month, followed by social assistance and education. And this is troubling because when you look at the overall economy, those jobs make up about 15%, yet they are leading the job growth. So we're seeing a very narrow range of jobs, an overwhelming number of jobs being added in just a few categories. So it's not broad-based hiring that we're seeing. And again, I think it speaks to the fact that a lot of companies are just afraid to bring on more workers because they're not even sure what their demand is going to be like for products going forward. Will they need these workers on their payroll?
Leo, what do you think this means for the Fed? Because usually you see a softening job market, that would be a reason to perhaps cut rates, but they've been citing uncertainty over tariffs as a reason to keep rates steady, and now we have new tariffs.
This is a really difficult situation for the Fed because they have a dual mandate. That dual mandate is price stability and maximum employment. And if you look at the price stability side of their mandate, it's not really about tariffs. It's about what tariffs will do to consumer prices. And all the indications that we are starting to get that we got from past tariff announcements, from the tariffs implemented during the first Trump administration, is that tariffs raise consumer prices. And if tariffs raise consumer prices, you have one side of the Fed's mandate being under pressure, which is prices are going up. The Fed has to maintain stable prices. You have another side of the Fed's mandate that's also feeling pressure, which is the labor market is weakening. We're hiring fewer and fewer workers every single month. But strangely, even though we're hiring fewer and fewer workers, the unemployment rate hasn't been going up. And again, that's a labor supply story because labor supply is so restricted due to current immigration policy. And so the Fed is in this really difficult situation. I really don't see a case yet for the Fed to be reducing interest rates in its September meeting. Maybe by October or December, we're going to start getting interest rate cuts. But right now, the Fed is very focused on inflation, and rightly so, because even in a lot of numerator surveys, we see that US consumers are still saying inflation, higher prices. That's the number one thing I'm worried about. They're not quite as worried about the job market. They're not worried about crime and immigration. They're not worried as much about global instability. Consumers keep telling us, the 200,000 households that we survey, that they're really concerned about higher prices.
All right, Alexis Christoforous, Leo Feller, we appreciate it. Thank you both.